So I just want to start with a few numbers for you. So a study last year showed that in King County alone, we need another 244,000 affordable housing units between now and 2040. And even if we didn't have any more growth, if we stopped at where we're at, that number would be 140,000. So we're really in a crisis here. We're not talking about 10 units, 20 units. We need thousands and thousands of units over the next 20 odd years. And so this is going to take a lot of different solutions. This is going to take the tiny home villages for the homeless. It's going to take the nonprofits building for families and seniors. And I'm going to talk to you about something that we're doing as far as residential suites and building for workforce housing. So to start with, what are residential suites? They're smaller, high-class, studio-sized apartments located in our downtowns, and they're built without any government subsidies. And why this is really important for us is that it means that we can grow larger and go faster. So at this point, we have been involved in closing in on 1,000 units in Seattle on the east side to create more housing for working households. And in downtown Kirkland, where utility or studio apartments start around $1,700 a month, our residential suites go for $700 to $900 a month, and that includes utilities. And all of our communities are LEED Platinum certified. So who exactly lives in a residential suite? The idea with microhousing is usually that it's the young professional or the college student, and what we found is there really is no specific demographic that lives in a residential suite. It's your barista, your hairdresser, your grocery store employee, your preschool teacher, your firefighter, your retired police officer. Really, we've seen all sorts of folks in these units. 35% of our residents are over 35 and 10% are seniors. So really, there is no one person that this sort of housing works for. And then, of course, we hear about all the six-figure tech jobs that have flooded our region in the last couple of years. But what isn't talked about so much is that half of our jobs coming to this area are actually making under $50,000 a year. So 80% area median income and below. And where those people are living generally is they are getting in their car at the end of the workday and they are driving an hour or two to get to something a little bit more affordable. And what we're looking at doing here is creating these residential suites so that these employees, when they're done with their day, get to stay in the city that they're working in. So I want to go a little bit back to the beginning when it comes to Kirkland and how we went about this code change. From the very beginning, the City Council and the staff have been very, very collaborative with us to make sure that we were building in the best code to make these really flourish and work well. And with that also means that we spent a lot of time with our neighbors and a lot of time with community groups and neighborhood meetings to really talk through people's concerns and really talk through, who those people are, that they're their neighbors and they're the people that serve them and they're not scary and they're not different and they deserve to be in the community just like everyone else. And then, yeah. Another key component about this is parking. Less so in Seattle, but on the east side, design really follows parking more than anything else. And so to start with, we had to cut the code requirement in half, which was really scary at first for the cities because everyone on the east side has a car, has two cars, or at least that's the narrative. But we were able to go through and show parking studies and show that half was really more than we needed. And the city of Kirkland and Redmond have both been very good about making sure that we aren't overbuilding parking. And then part of that is having strict TMP management. So every resident that moves in with us has to sign an affidavit whether they do have a car or they don't have a car. And if they do, they're required to park in the building. We do not allow our residents to park on the street. Street parking is an issue pretty much everywhere. And our goal is to have just the right amount of parking for what we need and keep it within our building, but also environmentally, we don't want to dig a bigger hole, we don't want to pour more concrete, we don't want to build more than we actually need. And with these being affordable units and a parking stall costs about $40,000 each, any extra stall is just something that we couldn't afford, our residents couldn't afford. And then of course, there's LEED Platinum. The City of Kirkland requires LEED Gold as a minimum for residential suite construction, which was actually something that we pushed for because we believe that LEED Platinum is really LEED is a very, very important part of, number one, creating trust with the neighborhood. When people see that you're building something so green and really better than what they live in, they start to feel a lot more comfortable about what's going in their neighborhood. And then of course, sustainability is really the linchpin of long-term affordability. When you're talking about long-term durability, long-term affordability, sustainability really protects that long-term. King County Housing Authority controls 10,000 units in our county, and what they've told us is that their biggest cost going forward, their biggest problem, is the fact that utility bills and maintenance is going up twice as fast as incomes. And so when they're looking at long-term affordability and long-term having housing for folks, the durability and utility aspect is really key. And so what we build for the average for each unit, including their share of the common areas, for heat and hot water is $5.02 a month. So even so even when it doubles, it goes to 10 and not 100. And then as far as the success goes, really, the parking has been key. As housing costs have skyrocketed, car ownership has really been a really big problem on the east side. But what we've seen is that our average is about 0.28 to 0.43 cars per unit, which is well below the 0.5 that's required by code. And so what we've been able to do is house temporary construction vehicles. We've been able to park volunteers for the 4th of July and Summerfest and other events. And so we've been able to use that extra parking as a community resource. And in addition to that, we unbundle our parking. And so what that means is that traditionally when you rent an apartment, parking is just included. And we absolutely have to unbundle that, and every car owner pays for their parking stall, because no matter what, the parking has to be paid for by the project. Like I said, we are a profit developer, so in order to get financing from our bank, we have to show that the cost of building parking is paid back. And so if you unbundle the parking, it's only the car owners that are paying for it and not the ones that don't have a car. And when our residents are making $25,000, $30,000 a year, the cost of car ownership is really a burden. It's a luxury and a burden for someone that doesn't make a lot of money. And that's where location matters a lot. What we found is that it's not just the want of having no car, but it's really placing these in locations that really work well and you can thrive that way. So pretty much the traditional choice it has been, if you are a low or middle income worker, that you have to drive to find affordable housing. Now that drive is an hour and a half, 2 hours each way every day to Marysville, Everett, South Sound. Monroe is looking close, and it's not. And when instead our residents can choose to live in a residential suite, it means that they can live and work and play all in the same community. And so part of that key is having the place where you have your job, you have transit, you have your grocery, your doctor, everywhere that you need on just a regular basis to get around. And when I was at the Puget Sound Regional Council a few weeks ago, the Snohomish County folks were there, and they said that they'd actually built a TOD project on their busiest park and ride in the county, and they found that it was a complete failure. and they had to actually lease another property for more parking spaces. And they're like, well, we're right next to transit. It's really great community. It's right next to transit. But what they found is when the jobs aren't nearby and the services nearby, even if you can take transit to your work, if you can't get anywhere else, then the cars still stay. And then as far as that car ownership, what you see on the left, one of the folks earlier tonight talked about the 30% of your budget going to housing, and then what's expected nationally is that 19% of your budget then goes to transportation, which leaves 51% left over for everything else. If you have a really long commute, 19% probably isn't even enough if you're making 80% of the area median income. When you live in a 10-minute community and you can get rid of that burden of the car, even if you have a full bus pass, even if you somehow have to pay to maintain your bike every month, and you pay 40% for housing, you still have more money left over in the rest of your budget. So really taking that burden of requiring a single family vehicle for everyone really changes the dynamic. So we really need to look at our opportunities outside of the box. We need to look at sustainability and affordability to create better options, a better life for everyone that lives in the Puget Sound. Thank you.